Okay, so now that we're out of the remake versus, at least for this time around, I figured we would go into the two Tales from the Crypt movies. I think there's technically three of them, with that one called Ritual that had like Tim Curry and Craig Sheffer and Jennifer Grey in it. I think I actually never saw it, but to my understanding, it's definitely an unofficial one, I guess you could say. So we are going to talk about these two though, Demon Knight and Bordello of Blood, and going into it, to just kind of touch on the series itself really quickly and how one comes into these movies. I do remember, I have vague memories of my dad watching this on HBO like real late at night, and I was always afraid of, like, I never actually watched it, but I was just afraid of it in general. Probably the Crypt Keeper mainly, but I did know of its existence, and I knew the opening and the theme and stuff like that. Like always seeing and hearing that always, brings back those kind of memories. But then I eventually did watch the whole thing all the way through, and my just love in general for anthology horror was really extremely into it. But I think another thing that kind of goes by the wayside when you come back to it is when you are watching all of them, there's also quite a few stretches where they can get like kind of repetitive, and they're definitely not as strong as some of the other ones. And I've noticed that like the way they do, sometimes some of them feel like just regular horror stories and monster stories or whatever, but also a lot of them have like themes in a way, whether it be morality themes or whatever, and they hit a whole wide array of things. And I do find it a little interesting with how much that the show touched on in that regard, that the two movies here are essentially just, horror movies or horror comedies. And in Demon Knight's case, kind of a lot of action going into it also. It's, as far as taking that approach, I do feel like there was maybe something more to take advantage of as far as bringing Tales from the Crypt to like theaters. But there, like when you look at like some of the episodes that I love personally, like some of my favorite ones would be like Top Billing, the one where John Lovitz thought he was doing Hamlet for like a theater or something, which obviously did not go that way. Abracadabra, the one with Beau Bridges about like the vengeful brother and like where he seems dead and he isn't, that kind of thing. The New Arrival is fucking insane, the one with like Zelda Rubinstein. The Ventriloquist Dummy, the one with Bobcat Goldthwait and Don Rickles, is one of my favorites. It goes in such an insane direction that you wouldn't believe. Two for the show, the David Paymer one that kind of felt like a Hitchcock, like a gory Hitchcock movie. And you'll notice like all of these, there's so many different degrees of what this show could do. And so going into the movie itself, I do really appreciate Demon Knight. I figure we'll just, instead of like a versus thing like we usually do, this is just more of a review thing, and I'll talk about one than the other, because I don't even really know how comparable they actually are. So to just sort of talk about Demon Knight, to start off with, I do love that when you talk about bringing a TV show to the screen, you have to do something a little different. You have to go a little bigger. But like you have to draw a line between knowing what the fans of the show really love about the show, but also embrace the fact that you're making a movie. And Demon Knight feels like it is absolutely psyched about being a movie. Like it loves the fact that it's bringing Tales from the Crypt to an actual theater screen. And to my understanding, it was like a really big deal. Like showings of Demon Knight were like packed like out the doors practically, from what I've heard. And I imagine that was probably the best way to experience this. I actually didn't see Demon Knight until much, much later. But I was very familiar with Bordello of Blood, or a certain version of Bordello of Blood, because I feel like it's another one of those movies we've talked about a lot where at a point in time Comedy Central had like a few movies just on constant rotation, and Bordello of Blood was one of them. So I saw a censored version, of which you can imagine such a thing, for quite some time, and then I don't know if it was a movie channel or what, or maybe I got it from the video store or something, but I finally saw the uncensored version, and obviously one of the first things that caught me by surprise was, to 2468, you can watch me celebrate is not the actual line. So there's that. And I remember watching it on Comedy Central. Like, I have a vivid memory of her saying celebrate in the censored version, and my dad just laughing, and I wasn't sure why. Now I'm aware. So, going into that, despite the fact that I knew Bordello of Blood so well, by the time I had seen Demon Knight really late, I did know that Demon Knight was the one that I heard everybody say was so great for a very long time. It was the one that everybody really wanted to talk about. And has a soundtrack that's probably even more famous and beloved than the actual movie is. But going into it, like I said, I do love that it's embracing being a movie so much, but also like starting with the show's full intro and giving us the whole thing, even setting it up with like the actual like TV like credits, like almost to a comical degree, because you go in, it really sets up that it's this big thing now, it's this big production, it's a giant movie, and then like we start off with a giant explosion, something that probably would have barely been in the show's budget, if at all, and it's like after this explosion has happened and it's on the screen and the fire's on the screen, we're still getting these very mundane TV-like credits at the start of it, and it's like we're kind of getting the best of both worlds, and I feel like the way they combined that for this opening was really good. But then, yeah, once it gets going, even though it at least felt like the show had a big budget, and with, you know, the names attached, like Zemeckis and Gale and Donner and Walter Hill and all them, I imagine there was probably a lot backing it, but you can still get the sense of it being bigger than usual. And so when it does get to the point where we meet all the characters and we're at a certain place and everything starts to take off, it does just feel like a demon movie and, you know, a horror movie. And it's with, like, you know, Evil Dead vibes. And that's essentially what it is. Like, we get, you know, Dick Miller reading a Tales from the Crypt comic later. But other than that, it does just kind of become a horror movie, which, you know, it works well in its favor. Works better than Bordello of Blood does. Even though I said I wasn't really going to compare them. I can throw that out there. But what I really like especially is when you bring the William Sadler and Billy Zane characters into it, and we kind of start off in the middle of this chase that they're in, and we're not quite sure what exactly is going on. I like the way they play up for a while that we're not sure who the hero is and who the villain is between the two of them, but it's definitely one is one and one is the other, and everybody here is about to get caught up in this. And when I say everybody here, we do have a hell of a cast here. First off, talking about Billy Zane and William Sadler being the leads, obviously worth noting that they are coming from the show itself, with Billy Zane having been in the Well-Cooked Hands episode, the one with like the magicians and Martin Sheen and stuff like that, and William Sadler being in a couple of episodes, but most notably I believe it was the first one that aired, the one where he was like the executioner. So there's that feels like a nice callback, but then we have Jada Pinkett Smith, we have Thomas Hayden Church, CCH Pounder, Charles Fleischer, Dick Miller, Gary Farmer, I can't remember the girl's name that plays Cordelia, the John Larroquette cameo at the beginning, and just the movie is just piled with people that are so recognizable now that may not have been as big at the time, or were just breaking out at the time. And bringing them all together to make this sort of band of survivors while all this crazy shit is going on is going to be something that helps, and like where a cast can really sort of make or break a movie like this. Whereas like if you have a lot of shitty actors, it might have been like, it might have been a so bad it's good movie. When you have like actual real actors on top of the real practical effects and all that stuff going on, it does feel like you're making something more elevated. And it also helps the fact that pretty much most of the episodes of the show, regardless of how many there were, more often than not had somebody very recognizable in it at some point, whether it be a supporting character or a leading character. And so, like I was saying, you get this question of who's the hero and who's the villain here, and the way they reveal this, pretty much, is this moment where the movie really takes off, and you have to have that moment. That one moment where, if you're going to make a movie as crazy as Demon Knight is, you have to have the moment, like the turning point, that says this is what this movie is and this is what it's going to be from now on. And I don't know what better way they could have done that than have Billy Zane punch somebody completely through the head and then subsequently rip said head off while it's still attached to his arm. And then from then on, we have this crazy-ass movie that is going to go above and beyond with its effects and its gore and just the general insane nature, embracing everything over the top. And make it very easy to see how this was such a crowd-pleasing movie at the time, and really satisfied most of the fans that went into it looking for something like this. I feel like the practical effects especially, not enough can be said about, where, like, you have stuff like, you know, when the demons rise and stuff like that, and them themselves, and, like, all the different creative ways to destroy eyes, and all the body parts flying around, whether it be, you know, Dick Miller's head or CCH Pounder's arm. And just everything just feels like it's just going all in as much as it can. Which, like I said, when you're translating from a small screen to a big one, this is exactly the kind of transition that you want. And it's going all in to do so. And even the production values, as far as, like, you know, the setting of the building inside, and then, you know, there's the tunnels underneath, but also the flashback scenes where we see, like when we get, like, the biblical imagery, it looks like something out of, like, the early scenes of Coppola's Dracula or something. And it's like, in the way it's setting up, like, its own mythology, where there's really something here, where it is kind of like, it's setting up all the crazy shit and doing all the crazy shit on the surface, but it's also putting a lot of effort into just these side things also, to kind of make it this whole complete picture, and not necessarily just throw things out there that they think their audience will go for, like just gore for the sake of gore, or tits for the sake of tits. And yeah, I'm kind of talking about Bordello blood again, but we'll get there. We also have some character dynamic going on here. There's the whole Cordelia and Charles Fleischer thing that's going on, the unrequited thing, and then the reveals of how Charles Fleischer's character may not have been that innocent. They make the whole post office joke that actually I like the post office joke. I think not just because it's, you know, a payoff for that character, a dark payoff for that character, but the fact also that they set up that it's going to be really useful and then it just isn't. Where it's like we're expecting it to get the gear up scene from Dusk Till Dawn, and it's just like, oh, he didn't have bullets, so these weapons are useless. Except for the explosive ones, the weapons are useless. But talking about more character dynamic, we do have the villain within, because in these movies there's always going to be the human villain on top of the supernatural villain. The human villain in this case being Roach, the Thomas Hayden Church character. That's fun to kind of see him progress, where it's like he's just sort of all-around antagonistic, and we're just kind of waiting to see what sort of sleazy thing he's going to do that's going to get us into even more trouble. There's the moment where they're outside, and he just literally throws Cordelia to the demons, just to defend himself and save himself. But then this gets all the way down to moments where he's actually, like, you know, stealing the key from Sadler, and things are just really... He's basically willing to end the Earth just for his own purposes, and comparing literally living in hell to having hemorrhoids, which is just one of those lines where it's like, you don't know if it works or if it doesn't work, but somehow it belongs in the movie. It just does. So the way they're able to balance that is great. But talking about characters here and the dynamics that do work, and having Jada especially as, like, the one that kind of comes out on top, like the one that kind of starts off tough but then finds more toughness as it goes on, and basically comes out being the hero and being, you know, the new Breaker, I think his name was, the Sadler character. All that makes sense, but obviously the real star of this show is Billy Zane. And not just, you know, the way he's playing this, you know, demonic character, and the idea of him being able to, like, entice people being, like, pretty much the height of his power here, as far as how he's controlling them. But the fact that he gives so much life to this, like, you can say the movie's, like, super over the top, it's got great practical effects, it's doing all this stuff, it's throwing everything in the kitchen sink, and that's what we love it for. Yet somehow at the same time, I feel like this would not be the movie that it is without this Billy Zane performance. And the fact that, like, everything else going in pretty much, that he's able to match single-handedly is pretty crazy. And how we have these scenes where, he's, like, he's enticing people, and we see, like, when he gives Dick Miller this whole sort of immersive scenario where he's surrounded by women and drinks and all that. I do think that's something we could have seen a bit more of when he's doing that to everybody. Like when he goes after Cordelia and Jada, and he's doing the thing where he's like showing them something, and it's this very sort of dark and dim future, this dire future. But I don't, and I get where that's coming from also, but I also feel like it feels like it would have more life if they went really, really all in on how exactly he showed people what, you know, their future could be or what their desires could be or whatever. And it only feels like we got small doses of that. And I feel like that could have brought even more life to what's going on here, and more life to this Billy Zane character that's showing, like, has this facade of all this stuff that's really appealing, and then ultimately has this dark side on the other side of it. This dark, like, literal hell and eternal damnation on the other side of it. But regardless, I do still think everything here has such a big personality, just in general. But there's also, and I also love, we're talking about how much they go in on, like, the action and the gore and stuff like that, and the way they destroy the demons and all that is super fun and gross, and, like, the more like gooey and gory it is, the more fun it's gonna be, because the more it's embracing what it is. And I love especially that they didn't cop out on needing to take care of Danny when the kid turns into, it kind of reminds me of the kid in Near Dark, where it's the kid and he's a vampire, but he's actually, like, really, really old. And you would think because he's a child by sight, that he'd have an outcome that's not as gruesome as everybody else gets, and that is just not the case. And I love, I love that the movie committed to that as well, and we get to see that kid explode, and it's like, because he's not a kid anymore, he is now a demon, and that's the fact that he used to be a kid and that he's still in a kid's body is not going to change what needs to happen to this. So I love the commitment to stuff like that, and just in general not copping out. As far as other character deaths, I do think the only thing that kind of stands out to me that I sort of question is Bob, the Gary Farmer character, has, like, a whole arc where he goes from, like, he's kind of got this cowardly vibe to him, and he's kind of timid, and then as it goes on, he becomes, like, a hero more and more. And then we get to the point where CCH Pounder sacrifices herself with the explosives and takes herself out in order to take out a lot of the other demons, and just for some reason Bob is with her for this sacrifice. That one I could never really figure out. Even I don't know how many times I've even seen the movie at this point. It's quite a few, and I still haven't quite. I always feel like I missed something there. Was he mortally wounded or anything like that? But it feels like he just decided he was part of the sacrifice, and it's like the writers were thinking, like, oh, well, he's already had an arc this far, this would be like the ultimate arc, where he goes from the coward to the guy sacrificing himself, but it's like, well, I don't know that he really earned the sacrifice. I mean, he did it, good for him, but I don't think he needed to, so that was interesting. But apart from that, yeah, and then how that brings us to our climax, where Jada kind of takes over after Sadler's death and becomes the sort of ultimate hero here, and we do get this great climax with her and Billy Zane, this sort of tango to the death of sorts, almost tango to hell of sorts, that's really well done and really well shot. And Ernest Dickerson being the director, which for some reason I didn't mention yet, who was like Spike Lee's like longtime cinematographer, and then went on to do stuff like the movie I always associate him with is Bulletproof, because I saw Bulletproof a billion times as a kid. But he did this as well, and yeah, and has a really good hold on what was going to make this a good translation from small screen to big screen, because that's something that a lot of movies really. It's not a transition that can be pulled off easily, apparently. But this one does do a very good job of bringing the fun of the show and the reasons that we love the show to the screen. Like I said, it does feel like it's, you know, missing something by not really being a little bit more, having something a little more clever to it than just kind of being an action horror comedy at the end of the day. And not like, having some sort of thematic thing like a lot of the show's episodes do. But like I said, as far as making a spectacle, it was going to be about bringing the fun of the show to the screen, and that's what it pulls off. So it does accomplish that. As far as Bordello of Blood goes, like I said, I did see this so many times on Comedy Central as a kid, and of course, even being a censored version, it still felt like an R-rated movie, and I was at the age at this point where that in itself was just fun. It's almost like seeing a censored version of it was like me getting away with seeing it multiple times, because I was also really, really, really squeamish to gore. Not that I'm not now, but it was like I could pretty much watch no kind of gore whatsoever around this time, so it was always cutting off at just the right points to where I could watch this over and over again and not be bothered by it. And now of which the gore is one of the main things I appreciate about it, and the fact that they're still using the practical effects, like when a head gets ripped off or when the tongue goes down the dude's throat and rips his heart out. And it's like, I remember seeing the tongue go down the throat and the bulge. That was still intact. I don't know. I looked away. I never knew if the censored version showed, like, how much of the gore it actually showed. But all of that can certainly be appreciated. But we also start off with another. We don't get the opening like we did in Demon Knight. We don't get the opening of the show at the start. So right away there, it's like, oh, okay. It's like, well, yeah, you really accomplished, taking the fun of the show, and like giving us the best of both worlds. And now it feels like you're really trying to just kind of be a movie. But we do have. After we get a prologue that's about the story, we do get our Crypt Keeper opening with William Sadler again as the mummy, a mummy with ties to the movie industry, and Sadler seems to have like a really great time. Anytime Sadler's associated with Tales from the Crypt, it seems like he's having an absolutely wonderful time, and of course that's great. And I think it kind of even mirrors. There's a couple more actors in Bordello of Blood that also were in episodes, obviously one of which was Corey Feldman. I think Corey Feldman's episode, the one with like the home invasion and like the CIA or something, Sadler was in that one as well in the opening, like in a very similar scene as this, if I remember correctly. But that's great and all, but then we realize that what we're going into is not just a standalone prologue like we usually get. It's all part of the movie where Angie Everhart has been this resurrected vampire who is now running a bordello, and people are starting to disappear. So, and then we have Erica Oleniak and her no-good brother, who is Corey Feldman, and it's you notice how much more bored I am talking about this one than I was Demon Knight. But yeah, and then obviously he ends up disappearing by going to this bordello, and she has to hire Dennis Miller, a private investigator, to investigate this, and that's what the plot is. So it does take a little bit to get going, while simultaneously having lines like a prostitute saying, "Do you want to take the Skin Express to Tuna Town?" and stuff like that, and having a lot of, gratuitous nudity. And just right away, I was talking about the gratuitous nudity, and the thing that stands out about this is the sort of dated aspect of, HBO being HBO and this show being this show, and having a lot of the gratuitous stuff where a 90s audience basically watches it partly for that. Because you don't really get it anywhere else that's considered, not taboo as far as society goes or whatever. So it did feel like there was a point in time in, like, the 90s and the early 2000s maybe, where it was a really big deal no matter what. Like, when I see, the nude scenes in Bordello of Blood, I can just imagine a 90s audience in the theater going crazy and thinking it's the greatest thing ever. And it's like the fact that it's sort of thriving on this, or attempting to thrive on this, with the plot itself. And the plot itself does come from, a very prestigious place by the names we went through that are coming up with this, and, have the story credit. But at the same time, like I said, it does feel like it has a sort of dated aspect to it as far as how it's trying to appeal to the audience. Like I said, maybe not at the time that it came out, maybe, but I do know that we did not get an official third movie because Bordello of Blood performed so poorly, so I don't know. Maybe maybe it was already dated back then to an extent. But like I said, there is still some creative gore here. There's I didn't mention the exploding nurse in the scene with the Whoopi cameo, which is, once again, she was in another episode, so there's that, I guess. But talking about the center of this movie, and I don't mean the prostitutes and the gore and the vampire plot and all that, that would be Dennis Miller. And Dennis Miller is certainly at his Dennis Millerist in this part. And it is to my understanding that it does feel like... Now, as far as the way he contrasts with the other characters, like the other characters that are like in this horror movie of sorts, it feels like it actually makes sense from that contrast standpoint to see him come into this. But at the same time, it is like everything else here is so absurd already. Where like you have the guy that's like, you know, the guy that runs the place, like fondling the corpses and cutting them open and breathing in their gases, and there's just something so absurd about these characters already. I feel, and it feels like self-aware to the point that it doesn't really feel entirely necessary to have a Dennis Miller come in to tell us how weird everything is. You know, it's like, I can see where this would have worked if they had played it straight. Then there would be a contrast there that would make perfect sense. And Miller playing it as he plays it would make perfect sense. But, like, everything is just so in your face about how absurd and comedic the whole situation is. Like, there's no real horror element to it, it feels like there was in Demon Knight. It just feels like it's a comedy that just happens to have horror in it instead of the other way around. And the fact that a lot of this stuff that's also meant to be funny, while being absurd, just kind of stops at absurd, which could be effective in another sense, but I don't think a Tales from the Crypt movie is going to be doing that or bringing that. And not intentionally, certainly. But it is to my understanding that while it is, you know, fun to an extent to see Dennis Miller come in and sort of just roast everything and everybody in his path, I do like the moment when he's on the phone with his ex-wife, and the way he hangs up the phone is, "Gotta go, fuck you." Like, stuff like that is funny. And it's the stuff that you can... And, like the guy that he interrogates at the bar, who's clearly an absolute giggling idiot, and he just calls him Stephen Hawking. Just little throwaway comments like that, I think, are something that Dennis Miller does very well and work for this character, especially in these situations that he's in. But having said that, I did also read about how Dennis Miller, it's basically a miracle that this movie got made with him, because of the problems he was causing, whether it be not showing up, or pissing everybody off, or annoying everybody, or ad-libbing to the point that the lines that the actors had to say back to him didn't even make sense anymore. And so they were trying to rework the script, but also almost giving up halfway because it felt like there was hardly a point to even try to fix it, so it just stayed as is. And that's... you can see that coming through. Like, it'd be one thing if he was a pain in the ass, but it was to the movie's benefit. Could probably be something, but that's... you could get the sense that he kind of came in, he said, "I'm just going to do my own thing," and then he would leave. And like I said, the fact that he's basically the center of the movie, that's going to be a problem. And like I said, it sucks because you can actually see his personality and his type of comedy working in this environment. But it's... I don't know, and I guess it could have worked better also if it delved a little more into... I honestly think, even being, you know, a horror comedy, there could have still been something fun about making this investigation-style story, because he's a private investigator, except for the fact that we already completely know what's up. and we're just sort of waiting for everybody else to realize that this is a bordello of vampires, and this is, where Corey Feldman is, and all of the solutions to all the problems are stuff that we already know. And I know you would think, like, oh, why does that really matter when you're watching a Tales from the Crypt movie? As long as the tits and the gore are here, what's the problem? But, like I was saying, it's as far as doing exactly what it set out to do in the best way that it possibly can, like Demon Knight did. And it's like, you can see the pieces of what Bordello of Blood wants to be and is trying to be, and it's not getting there. And you kind of get the sense to where they're half throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks, but also literally half-assing it. So there's that. And you can see moments here also where there are silver linings that are coming through where it's like, oh, that's a fun and interesting idea, and it would have been cool if they kind of went more into that instead of just treating it as an idea and nothing else, and elaborating on it in a funny way. Like, the whole casting of Chris Sarandon as this, like, TV preacher that's involved in this because he wants to punish sinners, but is ultimately having a turnaround. And you get the sense that his whole involvement here is essentially just an in-joke directed at Fright Night. And it's like, there is something there, and there's certainly, Chris Sarandon certainly has the charisma and the presence to bring something to this. Like I said, it's the material that doesn't really take this to the points that it can. Because it's like, when Corey Feldman shows back up and he's a vampire, it's like, you can tell they said, okay, Corey, go up to 11. Actually, fuck 11. Go up to a 15 on a scale of 10 for us. And Corey Feldman, God bless him, did that. But it's like, yeah, you can tell Corey Feldman, take it up to 15 on a scale of 10. But then you don't really give him anything to do with it. He's just kind of there wagging his tongue and cackling, but to what effect? And this isn't a Corey Feldman problem. This is there's really nothing to do with this movie problem. So, I don't know. Another person I didn't mention was Phil Fondacaro, who was also in the Food for Thought episode, the one with Ernie Hudson, coming in as like this other villain that's helping raise Angie Everhart and start this whole thing up again. And as far as these characters being here and having their points where it's like, oh, this person is, turning on this person or whatever, it all feels like it's very, very rushed. Especially because for a movie like this, that's really, you come here and it's like, you want, at the bare minimum, the farthest down the audience goes, they're here for tits and they're here for gore. But when you actually get to the point to where we're killing off the main characters now because we're reaching a climax, everything just feels really rushed and really last minute, and the characters just start dropping like flies really unceremoniously. And then, because you have the scene where it goes full campiness when they have the water guns and they're killing the vampires with holy water, with Ballroom Blitz playing. And it's at this point where you're like, I feel like this is the fun that the movie promised. This one scene where they're killing the vampires with water guns with Ballroom Blitz playing, that's what the movie was supposed to be. That's the vibe the movie was supposed to be the whole time. But really, it's just kind of that one scene. And it's like, if it had been at that level the whole time, we probably could have had something here. But as is, that's just where we're at. So, and on top of that, it's just the Dennis Miller character getting more and more tiresome as we go, and them trying to throw in these sort of plot moments, I guess. We got the whole thing with the heart having to be split up in 4 pieces, with the heart in 4 pieces thing, and that making a cross in order to do that. That's something interesting. Like, there's little details in here where you're like, that's creative, I guess. But overall, it's, like I said, eventually just very anticlimactic. And apparently, there was also some good ideas that just eventually got cut. Like the fact that, the Catherine character, the whole reason she's, like, in Jesus Freak mode is because she used to be a porn star. And it's like, that's a whole other thing. Like, you could have made a whole other thing about it. You could have cut half this movie out and given half the movie to that. And you would have had something. But, yeah, it just kind of feels like it's all over the place and a little too rushed, and wasn't near as passionate about, bringing the show back to the big screen in, like, a really big way. in a really ceremonial way, in the way that Demon Knight did. And so, like, everything, you can just sort of sense everything sort of running out of gas in the last minutes. Not to say that there isn't some fun here to be had, for sure. Like, and it does give me a nostalgic feel for when I used to watch it on Comedy Central and stuff like that. I think I still remember where the commercial breaks were, too. But, yeah, but it does feel like they kind of just gave up on it sort of halfway through, and you didn't get that, fun and determination to make something as, big and glorious as how Demon Knight turned out. So that's unfortunate. You can kind of see where the idea of doing an official third movie just kind of died off. So that's unfortunate, but I'm sure, just for nostalgia's sake, it's still a movie I'll go back to sometimes. But probably Demon... I guess, after all this, I guess I should probably also say that I actually don't even necessarily love Demon Knight that much. Like, I know people do, and I know people, like, can really say, oh, man, it's such a blast, I watch it every October or whatever, and it's like, I don't really... I've seen it a few times, sure, but, I don't... It's not something that I'm, like, really in love with, necessarily, so... So I don't have that kind of passion for it, but like I said, when you're comparing it to Bordello of Blood, which I said we weren't going to do, but here we are, it's... Yeah, you can definitely see where one succeeded in doing exactly what it wanted to do, and one maybe not so much. So, yeah, so that's what these are. I kind of would like to talk about the show a bit more at length. I have no idea how to go about that, but I assume that'll be a video down the line in one form or another. But, yeah, so the next thing is... Oh my god, I don't even know what the next thing is. As I said, I'm shooting all these out of order, so... Yeah, it's going to be something. It could be something Stephen King related, it could be another Versus, it could be anything. It could be the awards video, I have no idea. So, I guess we'll figure that out as we go along. So until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.